and good evening. I nearly said good morning. Good evening to everyone, and welcome to the Maternity Midwifery Hour. And you will see I'm joined by the lovely Dianne Garland this evening. Yay! It's great to see you, Dianne. I just have to remember to introduce myself in a proper way. And my name's Sue Macdonald, and I'm the curator for this Maternity Midwifery Hour and the Midwifery and Maternity Festivals. And it's my great pleasure to be chairing this evening's session after having a little holiday last week. So thanks to Sheena and the team for looking after things so beautifully. It was really interesting being a participant and not the chair. It's quite a little treat for me. But we always have to start off, Dianne, and you know this, you know what's going to happen now. We have to put Dianne on the spot and ask her to share a moment of the week. So please share your moment of the week, Dianne. Okay. And welcome again.
Thank you. Am I allowed two?
Okay.
Well, because they're both similar in so much as I'm an ardent reader, and both these books, Flourish and Closure, have just both come out, and one's arrived a while ago. I took it on holiday and read some of it on holiday, and this one, Closure, of which is very close to my heart because they're very close in South London to where I live, and this has arrived, and this is going to Bali with me next week because I'm off to ICM, and they've asked me to take a photo of it as it goes across the world to Bali. So that will be on Facebook, and I hope they put it on as well. So those are my two moments because they're very different. They've both got some very salient points for us to read, to absorb and to think about. But I am a real ardent reader. I just love reading, and anything to do with midwifery, I'm in there. I'm your girl.
I know. Well, I could testify to that, Dad, because whenever we meet, you've always got a book nearby. And it's always there. And I could share that. I also have the Flourish, but I've only dipped in so far because I'm keeping that for next week when I've got a little time to do that. But I've also been looking, because I think it's important what you said about books and where we're from. This one, Midwives and Medical Men, it's an oldish book by the lovely Jean Donaldson, but it's interesting when you go in there to see the cycles of what happens within midwifery. So for those of you who haven't read it, it's worth getting a copy. So I sneaked in a moment of the week myself there a bit. It's a bit saucy of me. So thank you so much, Dianne, for sharing that. We're going to come back to Dianne, but first of all, I'm just going to remind everybody where we came from. And this is as a midwife, of course. But you'll remember we're now 3 years old, the Maternity Midwifery Hour. And for some of you, this might be the first evening you're joining us. And if so, big welcome to you. Hope you, and I know you're going to enjoy this evening. So I'm saying I hope you do. But we started this right at the beginning of the first lockdown in the UK for COVID-19. Very scary time, very weird time. And you only remember bits of it now. You get sort of flashbacks of it, but it was a scary time. And it was a time when we couldn't, as midwives or student midwives, meet face to face, except at work with masks and everything. We didn't have the opportunity for continuing professional development or face to face events. And we wanted to start something off to really make sure that midwives and student midwives could connect and get some information on midwifery. At the beginning, we had a lot on COVID-19. We've had less on COVID-19, though it's still there. But we've kept it up because people seem to still enjoy it, which is great. And as you will know, and I always have to say this as well, everything is recorded. Nothing is missed. So if you miss anything, say I don't know, your cat brings in a bird or something tonight, it doesn't mean you won't miss anything. You can catch up at a later point, all free and all accessible on Netflix, who look after everything and make sure everything is accessible online. And if you want to do anything special and like have box sets, which lovely Jenny Hall looks after and curates for Netflix, those are much more focused sessions, because we've got about 1,700 hours of sessions, loads of sessions available. So it's been put into very accessible, digestible box sets. So if you're doing a project or dissertation or anything for work, it's a really good accessible resource. And if you're doing your revalidation, even better, because you're all set for time. So I have to say, we have released a sort of crowdfunding appeal, because we're trying to expand the Matflix and expand the maternity midwifery hour throughout the world, as we've done. We've ran all the way through COVID, and people may or may not know, but most of this is done for free. But of course, the technical side is much more tricky, and things cost more money now. So we're looking for any spare pennies that people might have that they can put in to this appeal. And you'll notice on the adverts, there's a little, I can never remember the name of the Q sign thing that you can put with your phone and go in and make any donations. So we'd be very grateful if you've got some spare money to just put in a little whatever, so we can keep on doing what we're doing, but also expand it so it carries on being free, because that's one of the big things about the maternity hour and about the maternity and midwifery festivals. They're all free to attend. Those of you who've been will know that. And we want to keep it that way, because it means that midwives have this resource for themselves. So we've got, I also want to say that if you do donate any cash, there are lots of little benefits like free Matflix subscription and that sort of thing. So if you've benefited, we'd be grateful. Anyway, I'm going to move on now. I want to say a big thank you to our midwives and our student midwives and everyone in the maternity services that's keeping everything going and doing what they do so well and being caring and kind to people. Really very important for everybody. And for those of you who are covering sick leave and holiday, because of course now the holiday season is coming up. Lovely for some of us, lovely for people like Dianne, who's going off to Bali. But people have to cover those spots. So thank you to everyone who's doing that. And that gives me an opportunity again to flush up the Flourish book, but also to say, look after yourselves just as you look after everybody else, because you are as important as everyone else, if not more so, to yourself and your family. Now, I'm going to move slickly onto the news. It's National Smile Day, and we're smiling. And it's also National No Tobacco Day. And it has been No Smoking Week. So those of you who've given up smoking this, it's month, isn't it? No Smoking Month. Those who've given up, well done, big well done. Huge health benefits and lots more money in your purse as well. So keep it up. I also need to say congratulations to Professor Mary Renfrew, good friend of the programme, and those of you who have read this cover to cover will know she had a big part to play in this. But this is the standards of proficiency for midwives, by the way. I always flash that up. I've got all these things on the side of my desk. She's been appointed to look at midwifery services in Northern Ireland. So it's a really good for Northern Ireland to have that sort of review, because she'll do a fantastic job. And yet again, we'll move midwifery forward. So congratulations, Mary. Now, I just need to remind you, if you haven't registered for the Manchester Festival, I think there's about 500 or 600 people already registered, free to attend. So if you want to come and meet us all face to face, come along. You can also access everything online as well, because we continue to be hybrid, because that's the way we are. Now, I also want to highlight that I don't know if people know about, and I'll say the full words, the National Institute for Health and Care Research, and it's NIHR. And it's a great way of accessing information. If you are a tweeter like me, you sometimes will access this information. But what they've got, they give you a little reminders of material that's coming out, and you can kind of sign into it, and they include a plain English summary of the research that they're talking about. So there were two interesting projects out, or interesting articles out. They're on your resources sheet, and there's one research about, and this is very topical, about Black women around the world having worse pregnancy outcomes. And this is an analysis of many studies throughout the world of 2 million pregnancies, found that babies born to Black women worldwide had poorer outcomes, such as baby death and stillbirth, than white women. And this was true even after controlling for older ages and lowest level of education among mothers, because that's often an indicator of poor economic and social status. That's really a really interesting piece of research. And if if your time is very short, you can look at the short English, plain English summary, or you can read the whole article, because both links are there on the resource sheet. And the other interesting piece of research was about research exploring midwives providing information in assisting women with decision-making during labour. And I'm sure Dianne will probably talk a little bit about that, but it's saying that midwives can find it difficult to get the information to women accessibly. So that's a really interesting piece of work to look at. Now, I need to say that the original session planned for tonight had to be rescheduled, but just to reassure people that we have Dianne Menage and Jenny Patterson will be with us later in the series, because tonight we're looking at WaterBirth. So we have our water wings out, and we have our special guest, Dianne Garland. She's truly a midwife expert, and it's also the name of her company, because as a freelancer, she's got enormous experience, and you could ask Dianne anything and she probably will know the answer. And if she doesn't know, she'll know someone who does. She's had an experience as a midwife. She's a CQC specialist advisor. She's an expert witness. She's been a university lecturer. And of course, she speaks nationally, locally, and internationally on WaterBirth as a consultant. And she's also a writer. So her book is also on the resources list, because that's also a really good resource for any midwife supporting a woman with a WaterBirth. And that's in new edition, I think 2017, I believe is correct. And she's also a maternity and midwifery forum advisory group member and a fellow of the RCM. And she's with us this evening. So welcome, Dianne. Thank you so much for coming at pretty short notice, straight off the plane, to join us with the WaterBirth. The screen is now yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Sue's right. I was actually waiting at Hania Airport when she texted me to see if I could put something together for tonight, which is not normally a problem. But at that point, we had no idea what time we're likely to take off. But we did, and we got back, albeit early hours of Tuesday morning. So thank you, Sue. My passion always has been WaterBirth. So let's see if we can get the slides to come up. Hopefully they will. Just as always, give the tech a sec to catch up with everything. Now I can see them. I don't know. You tell me when you guys can see. Yeah, superb. Thank you. So I'm not going to do any big introduction, but I do love this photo of me. This was one of my first trips to India, and myself and my colleague Barbara Harper from America were invited to speak, and this was the room we were put in. If you can read behind me what it says, the School of Ancient Wisdom, and Sue just talking about, you know, our history of where we've come from with midwives. I just thought it was brilliant. So I often use this because it just feels to me exactly where I've come from. There is ancient wisdom even around WaterBirths. So yeah, I'm not going to go through what I do because Sue very kindly has shared most of it. However, Sue wanted me to talk about the WaterBirth research tonight, and the title she gave me was Calm Seas or Stormy Water. And I guess over the years, we've done exactly that. We've had some very calm times with water, and we've had some very challenging times with water, and not just during COVID. I have to stress, we had very similar storms when HIV and AIDS first came out, and some of us obviously worked all through that, including with water. So the first couple of slides are just slides that I use. If you've ever heard me teach, you'll know. I very much passionately believe that if we're going to provide that information to women, we need to have the quality of research. And that's not just the quantitative, the facts and the figures, but we need that qualitative research. And those are just two very simple definitions that I share with parents as well when I'm teaching. It isn't just for professionals. Because I think sometimes people can get very mixed up with research, and both I feel are as important. For some of us, maybe the facts and figures, the quantitative stuff is more important, but I think from a woman's point of view, they need to know both. And that's what I'd like to share. And in the last couple of weeks, there's been an awful lot of new WaterBirth information coming out. Some I haven't even had a chance to read yet. And that won't be going to Bali with me. I'm going to have enough reading. But certainly the things I've picked out for this evening, I hope show you what happens when the research or the stories often come out. So yeah, that was the title, and just picking out some of the photos. I've been incredibly fortunate over my career for women willing to share their birth stories, and particularly their photographs. And this is just a tiny sample of around the world, colleagues, parents who have shared their stories. And I think I always say a picture says 1,000 words, and I hope that bears out from what you can see there. Couple of women with complex needs, baby Imogen, top right on my screen, just opening its eyes up for mum. She had a high BMI and wanted a home water birth. Caroline in the centre, previous caesarean section, when VBACs, let alone VBACs in water and at home, were all, oh boy, what do we do with this? And a colleague from where I was working who had GBS as well. And then the two women at the bottom, just showing the huge diversity around the world. We now believe there's about 119 countries who actively support WaterBirth. And the word is actively support, not just say we have a pool. And when the women ask, well, how many women use it? Or how many WaterBirths did you have last year? Either the midwife or whoever's showing them around can't answer, or are embarrassed to answer, or just don't know. So the word actively support is what I use a lot when I'm talking about WaterBirth. So we have Taiwan bottom left and India bottom right. So WaterBirth really is an international style of care. So this is just a slide. If you've heard me speak in the last year, you will have probably seen this slide, because what I do every time new research comes out, having read it, if I believe it adds something to this one slide, because there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies, what I do is add it to this, and then I remove the last one. So the Winjin study at the top from China, I always give a quick example of why these particular studies are there. And the biggest thing I think that comes out probably from that study is the numbers. Over 5,000 women in that study. And that's big because so many of the studies, still valuable, but are much smaller. Also, the huge cultural differences with birth experiences, birth care, and birth rights, not as in legal rights, but about, cultural rights. And of course, that's very, very different in China. This particular unit, like many, had very, very, very high caesarean section rates. So introducing water, they changed the whole attitude to birth, and, great credit to them. The Jacobi study is interesting, quite good sized numbers. One of my things I always say is it's so important we collect the data, whether you're doing 10 a year because you're a freelance or an independent midwife or on your own. That might be, you know, 1 a month, that might be correct. We still need the data. So it doesn't matter how big, but we do need to collect it and publish it. And I have to say, Canada, even though they've been doing WaterBirth since the early 1990s, have been really slow at publishing, despite me nagging everyone everywhere I go. Please, please publish. And we can help with that. One of my hats is as governance lead for WaterBirth International. And we have researchers around the world who will help with that. So please, it's a plea there. Please publish, collect your data and get it published. The SNAP trial, large numbers again, 10,000 women. This was unusual in America because this was the hospitals and the birth centres collecting data and analysing it together. Now, anyone who knows anything about healthcare in America may appreciate what a big challenge that was. So that's why they're there, because they pulled together as midwives working in different environments, but doing similar things, WaterBirth, but they've pulled their data together to get it analysed. The Harris study, which is now completed, this was the first time that 35 trusts in England got together to collect their data. I did one many years ago and there was 10 units joined together and we thought we were doing fab, but she managed to pull 35 units who joined together to collect their data. Now, whilst the outcomes that you'll see in a moment in these units are all very similar and very good, what was interesting that came out from those 35 different units was the equality. How many women actually used the pool? And Sue sort of alluded to that, the access. And it wasn't just access, it was also looking at the ethnicity and the social economic backgrounds of women. So it's not equitable at all. And that came up very clearly in that study. Now, the Barry study, and you know, this is now in Ireland, so Republic of Ireland. This is Paula Barry's study in one of the most well-known hospitals, the Coombe in Dublin. Small study. This had to be for her to move the project forward, a randomised controlled trial. And that's often been one of the criticisms of us as researchers, that we haven't got many RCTs with WaterBirths. Well, sometimes you have to explain why. When I explain it, I do remind people that, you know, there's lots of different types of research. And an RCT by many, particularly our medical colleagues, will often see that as the gold standard. But you only have to look at even some of our own national guidelines, things like NICE, that actually they haven't even got RCTs as their evidence. And yet we're often hammered for not having RCTs. So Paula's study was an RCT, 190 women, and you'll see in a minute the results are all very similar. The Boerberg study from America is another uniqueness of them. This was the home birth and the birth centre midwives also joining together to collect their results. And the results for both of those different environments, birth environments, were equal on everything they looked at. And then the most recent one that's on here is the SEED study, and it only came out last year. And this is from Australia, and we've nagged Australia for many years about not producing their data. So they have at last. It's not a huge study, but what really came up from their study wasn't about the outcomes, but it was about the number of women who could have been eligible to use water compared to those who actually did. So we're back to having an equitable service, and they, like many places, have exactly that problem. So what do we want from all of these studies? I'm not going to read it out. You're all able to do that. But, you know, very basic clinical outcomes, things that sometimes can be challenging, like what other analgesia is used in the pool. And that varies greatly around the world. From the baby's point of view, normally the only basic outcome we get recorded is an APGAR score. And that's universal. Everyone uses an APGAR score. So these studies you've just seen all report the outcomes in water were as good as, and in some cases better than, dry land. Now that's very powerful to share with colleagues, but of course, remember I said this is with women as well. Complications were extremely rare, and that's not to say they don't happen. You're going to see that in a slide in a moment. But from my point of view, my role, I hope, is to try and look at that outcome and see, was there something that we could have done to help before it got to that point? I'll explain it more when we get there. So that's a real basic introduction to research that I do when I'm talking. So this is one of the very new ones that came out. You can see it's only, you know, literally a couple of, I think it came out in March. And this was looking at neonatal outcomes. And we don't get many studies done for neonatal outcomes with WaterBirth. So we have to congratulate the Italians for doing it. Not a huge study again, and we recognise that. 144 water deliveries and 265 land deliveries. They were the number of women who were identified. And that's the one I said about complications being rare. They had 4 in water of neonatal cord avulsions. Now, this happened in a study a few years ago in Turkey, and we backtracked, myself and Barbara. And one of the things that we felt was that there was a degree of uncertainty about bringing the babies out of the water. In fact, we felt people were snatching the babies out. And that's not just professionals, that's parents as well. And then the cord snaps. And so, yes, they had 4 cord avulsions. I have emailed them back to try and see what other information I can get. I have to say, as a researcher, it's very sad when colleagues don't reply. I can't make people reply, and you know, when I ask questions, I just hope as researchers that they feel that there is value in doing that. And if you follow it down, there was one neonatal death, and that was from a baby that had a cord avulsion. So, you know, we are aware these complications can happen, but what we need to do is try and find out why, because 4 out of 144 is a high percentage. It is a high percentage. And obviously they had none on dry land. They did have some positive C-reactive protein results, but 6 versus 4 is not statistically significant. And then you turn it round, because then they had less neonatal admissions to their neonatal ward. In fact, they had none in water, but they have 1 on dry land. So trying to look at data and work it out can be difficult. The other one that's in red, which I found a bit strange, because they talk quite a lot about maternal outcomes, yet the study is about neonatal outcomes. But there they said that there was a higher risk of maternal fever post-Purim. So not during labour. So again, that's the sort of questions I've tried to, you know, find out from them. And then on the positive, less blood loss, less PPHs, less manual removals, and a low risk of episiotomy. And that I've challenged as well, because I want to know if they actually routinely do episiotomies on dry land, and would they try and do them in water? Because my brain is working, well, if you're not doing them in water, there always will be less than on dry land. So that's what I ask. Excuse me. What was good, that they did say that obviously we need to be trained to diagnose if there is a cord avulsion and actually deal with it immediately. And again, that's one of the things I do when I teach about how we deal with any complication. So that literally is fresh off the press. What about women's perceptions? Because I said, you know, the qualitative information is just as important as the quantitative. And again, just some recent studies, there's been quite a lot coming out in the last couple of years. But look in mauve, if you would, if you've got a colour screen, you know, what's said about it being liberated and transformative. That's from Claire Feely in the UK. In Ireland, they felt, this is again the Republic of Ireland, that there was a lack of information, accessibility to the pool. Remember, this is from the women, and dissatisfaction with the current model of care and service. Portugal, there's another one coming up from Portugal in a minute, looking for respect and affection, develop relationships and promote cooperation, inner healing, unnecessary interventions and supported by their partners. And then the final one is from Canada, again a big study where 59% of the 52% of those women showed an interest in WaterBirth if it reduces pain and it's risk-free from the newborn. So very different angles that women express when we talk about women's perceptions. So yeah, that's just a few. And then this one came out again just a few weeks ago from Portugal. Very, very different angle. And that's why having simple things like Google alerts, because look at the Journal of Religion and Health. I can assure you there's no way I would be subscribing to that journal. So that's the beauty. Google Alert brings these other things in, because they're talking about the spiritual experiences of Portuguese women who had a water birth. Very, very interesting, different angle. It wasn't big, again, 24 women, but they came up with those three spiritual related categories, they've called them. Beliefs and connections with your body. Well, I talk a lot about that when I'm talking to parents. Spirituality. Integration of being a woman and transformation during birth. Well, we know that. We talk a lot about that, but perhaps not seen in a spiritual way. And then the spirituality is wisdom, intuition, or the sixth sense. Perceived in a woman's faith and beliefs in a superior being that help them manage the unpredictability and uncontrol. Now, that one I haven't replied to yet, but I need to talk to DeCosta, because I'm fascinated by this, absolutely fascinated. And it's the first time I've ever seen an article, a study in this sort of context. So there's some interesting items out there. And then this one, this came up literally as I got back. It came up on my alert when I checked yesterday. Now, the two photos are both of this place. This is Genoa in Spain. Beautiful city. If you've never been, highly recommend it. But I was there last month teaching in one of their hospitals, and that's obviously us in the usual pose that we always do with WaterBirth. Let's all get in the tub. So that's typical. But this is a potential experimental study they want to do. As I say, it's not yet running. I'm hoping that the unit I was in will join in with this study that's being held at the university. Haven't heard back from them yet, but I'm hoping they will join in. I'm sure it's not just because I nagged them. They were already planning this, but it's been quite useful to see that other places are moving forward. They are, you know, catching up and starting to collect their data and starting to join together. So it's not just an individual unit. What about us? You know, we're often forgotten when it comes to, you know, studies and, you know, how important is this for us? So over the years, I've done various surveys, studies, questionnaires, various things. And then there have been two new studies that have come out from two very diverse backgrounds, one in Malta and one in Saudi Arabia. And again, if you read their papers, the same things come up whichever country you look at. So yeah, as practitioners, mainly midwives, but there are lots of countries where it's doctors who do the water births, always want to provide senior support and colleague support. Goes without saying, where water birth doesn't move forward, and it's not unique to water, you could probably say the same about things like complementary therapies and home birth, possibly even birth centres, but you need that support. If you haven't got it, things come to a grinding halt, and sadly over my career I've seen that. So yeah, of course we need support. We need education and training. And people often say, oh, but it's the same thing. Well, that's not how I see it. For me, the education is the discussion, the opening gambits about, you know, which women may or may not use water, and if they can't, what's our rationale for that? GBS, VBAC, the high BMI, those women I mentioned earlier. Whereas the training for me is much more what to do if there is a complication. What do we do if there's cord avulsion? What do we do if the woman starts bleeding? All those, I call them the what ifs. What if there's meconium? So that to me is the training part. Not black and white, but it's a bit more fixed than the education with all the reflection. Of course, we need guidelines for care, and it's quite amazing, you know, if people share their guidelines. Some are like, actually with me book, some are like little books like that, and others are just, you know, one piece of paper. So that's really interesting, and that even exists in the UK. It's not just around the world. We need to often look into things like change management. You know, if we're not getting the support, why aren't we? What can we do about it? How can we problem solve in normalising birth? People always want the appropriate equipment. I have real strange thoughts about why it is that midwives will accept substandard equipment, or even worse, no equipment at all, to support a woman with a water labour, water birth. And yet, if you look at other disciplines, our anaesthetist colleagues, there is no way they would put an epidural in for a woman without appropriate equipment. So why do we accept it? But of course they don't. Is that a powers thing? Who knows? So that comes up a lot. About empowering women. That's great to have that in there about what we feel, but do we feel empowered? Because if we don't feel empowered, how can we possibly empower women? So again, a lot of the discussions often are about your own environment. How do you feel empowered in your environment? And can you therefore empower those women? And there it is, of course, dealing with emergencies. The picture there is one that I've used for many years. It was actually a picture in a frame that I bought at a conference in America many years ago in Oregon. And I just think it's fab because you've got the mother and the baby at the centre, and then the guiding hands around her. And if you notice, they're not even touching her, which is the whole issue with water. And then she's in the water. So I've always loved that photo. So I do use that quite a lot because, like I said, a picture says 1,000 words. About the pool study, and that's what it's called. It's the pool study. First reported on actually at one of our festivals, so I don't know if you remember that, back in January 21. And the initial 3-site review was undertaken, although there were a lot more units involved, showing about the usage, which we've already mentioned. That's quite a high figure. They're saying 19% of women use water. Most people quote 20% will get in, 10% will get out, half will get out. So they're probably right on their actual entry to the water. But look at the difference between usage in different environments. What they didn't collect, although I'm hoping in the final report, because it was commented on, there's nothing in there about usage for home. So obstetric units, you can see at good 5%. Alongside birth centres, some 31%. And the freestanding one, I was surprised in that first report that they only said 61% were using water, because I've certainly worked with alongside colleagues who work in freestanding birth centres, and they say it's more like 80–90%. So it'll be interesting to see what that final report, which is being presented in September, which I'm going to. It will be also, I put it purposely in the middle, because it will be interesting to see if the limitations below, which were raised in that first review, have changed. Again, please look at the dates, remember what's happened for the last couple of years. So midwife training, I put everything on Zoom. Not easy to do practical things on Zoom, but you know, you have a go. Culture and staff attitudes, have they changed? Parents' information, I sadly think not a lot in many places. And there again is the pool availability. So that is going to be a really good review and a final study for us to look at. So that's me. Hope it wasn't too much of a whistle stop. What I would say is a couple of things that have been ongoing and will carry on. There's a new pod review called the OBS pod, as in obstetrician, the OBS pod, which I've only just come across. And a wonderful NHS obstetrician, who maybe we should get on to talk soon, called Florence Wilcott. And she's done a 25-minute pod, which I only listened to last night. And it's fab. And for an NHS obstetrician, she'll tell a story. It's really good. And then the final thing, which I have mentioned a couple of times, because I'm very excited going to Bali. This will be my 12th ICM. My first was in 1990 in Japan. And I'm presenting a poster there of a woman who had a fairly complex history. I'll give you a brief, because hopefully if anyone's coming to Bali, they'll come and see me in my poster. First of all, this was during COVID. She'd had a previous 4th degree tear, and on the Zoom talk with the consultant was sort of indicated, well, let's book you for your elective section. And she said, well, I don't want an elective section. I want a WaterBirth. And immediately, you know, the barrier went up. And she then told him she also wanted it at home. So she had huge issues, the 4th degree tear, COVID, at home, and wanting water. And I met her through her doula, and doulas are often not always mentioned that much. And I have a fantastic group of doulas that I know and work with. And it was her doula that contacted me, and we worked through it. We took all the pros and cons, gave her as much information as I could. And she had the most beautiful home water birth with a tiny little tear. We've written it up for one of the other journals, one of the colleagues who is on the advisory group. And I'm taking her whole story, including photos, with me to Bali. So I have to thank Kathy, her doula, and Emma, the mother, who will always know that I, you know, give them credit, because all I did was provide the information. That's all I did for them. And that's me, Sue.
But you've provided us with a massive amount of information, Dianne. And that's not a sort of all I did. I think that's so fantastic. And it sort of, it keys into that piece of research I mentioned earlier, really. So one of the most important things as a midwife you can do is making sure information is shared in an accessible, meaningful way, which you've done beautifully. Even starting off with that quantitative and qualitative research. And I should think any student looking at their research assignment will be sketching this out, because it's quite a complex sort of concept to get hold of, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that has been fantastic. And I love the way you finish with a story. As midwives, we all love a story. And that really brings it even more to life. So thank you so much. I mean, I was interested in the kind of particular issues around equity for women. I wonder if you have any magical ideas on how we could really address that huge issue, actually.
Mm. I think certainly in the UK, one of the issues is knowing your demographics. When we started all those years ago, you have to bear in mind that the first water birth mum I was involved with was 1987.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it was a very white middle class environment. So we didn't have to do an awful lot of looking at things like birth cultures and so on. Now that's changed, but of course it's changed as my career's developed. So, you know, when we meet mothers from other backgrounds, in all types, it's not just about ethnicity. You know, what is your expectation of me, you know, when I'm actually, you know, talking to you about your birth choices? And many women will never have considered water, because water in many cultures, even if they're in the UK, is a very, very, very precious resource. It can also be a very frightening resource. You only have to look at the news to see the terrible floods. So water is a very, very powerful element in lots and lots of ways for women, which is why that Portuguese study is so interesting. It's so unique. So that's something, you know, finding out from the women. And then when we're abroad, always, you know, going into different countries, I'm hoping to go to Barbados for one of the first ever birth centre openings in November. Yeah, I know. More sunshine. And she's a colleague who used to work with me in Kent, and she's gone back. And assuming we get there, which is, I think we will, it's going to be about finding out about what women from Barbados currently have as choices, how water will fit into that, and what their expectations are, and what birthrights you know, they have. So yeah, it's always finding that out. And I don't just turn up, you know, it's not like I get a week's notice to go somewhere. So I have a chance to find that out from whoever is hosting me, and to find out if there are barriers, where they are. And my sessions are always open to everyone. You know, if they know that the neonatal nurses are terrified they're going to get lots of babies admitted, well, there we are. We've got, you know, a study already now with that, a lot of the others. And I say, well, invite them. When we do the little bit, you know, about the first breath, make sure they come. And if it's not a good time for them in the programme, tell me and we'll move it. You know, it's not difficult. If it's infection control that are really worried about how we're going to make sure the pools are well cleaned and the equipment's looked after, you know, get them to come about, you know, the bits where we're talking about clinical outcomes. So, yeah, just really working around and trying to find out what's going on. But it is very sad when you do hear from women that they've been along, they've looked at the pool room, and so, you know, they'll ask, how many water births did you have last week, last month, last year? And either it's shake hands, yeah, and that's really sad. This equipment is expensive. You know, plumbed in birthing pools, if they're commercial ones, are expensive. And to me, that's public money, or even worse, it's been fundraised for, and then it's being used. I find that so sad. And
it's such a waste of a fantastic resource. It's not for everyone, but you know, women do like using these things, and midwives, once they get the confidence, also do. That's it. And I'd feel, wouldn't you feel, any of you watching, wouldn't you feel better if Dianne was standing by you, hand in hand, looking after you? You just need to listen to what she says. Now, we have some comments coming in now. Maura O'Callaghan, hi Maura, says she feels since the Ockenden report, many midwives are scared.
Yeah.
And that we have to admit to, that probably. Okay, and then we've got Claire Dale, who is a very regular watcher. Hi, Claire. And she says, I feel as though very few women are using our birthing pools in our trust, which reflects what you've just said. The criteria for being allowed seems to be getting tighter, and very few women are considered low risk enough. I wondered if nationally there's been a reduction in water birth rates. Well, Diane's the person to say all those research.
I think that's difficult because COVID has knocked for six so much. I'm hoping, you know, as things come up and we come out of that pandemic, because we're not out of it yet, we're moving, but we're not out, that things will move forward and we will get back. But, you know, that 20% of women, you know, in the UK really hasn't changed. And you're right, part of it is that horrible word, am I allowed? And as a midwife, that's where the advocacy needs to come in. You know, sadly, this year we've lost the famous Beverly Beach, and her book, you know, Am I Allowed, was only republished last year. So if you've never read that, please do, because Beverly has always been so fantastic as a supporter for midwives, for women, for choices. And that word allowed really should not be in our dictionary. Other countries, it's different because of the legal system.
Yeah.
In this country, that word allowed should not be there. We discuss it, we advocate, we support. But to say to a woman, you are not allowed, which is what Emma was told, you're not allowed in the pool. No, of course she's allowed.
And the trouble is,
yeah,
the trouble is, if you're in, and I always think this, you're in a hospital, especially, or even a birth centre sometimes, it can be a very alien place, or a place that isn't yours. It's probably easier to say at home, I want to be in a water birth. Whereas if you're in someone else's place, somebody just has to put a hint that it might not be allowed. And you kind of don't, you think, oh, maybe not. I'd like to.
Being the mother and the midwife supporting her, being the maverick, is really, really difficult. You know, I know that. I had that way back in '86 when this was first posed as a question, and we knew nothing about water birth then. It was just myself and her community midwife who thought, yeah, let's see what we can do with this. I've always felt I'm a maverick, but as I always say to colleagues, I'm a safe maverick, because I wouldn't still be practicing if I wasn't a safe maverick. So I know my boundaries, and I know how to support women within those boundaries. And if I don't know the answer, you know, when we first started getting women with GBS, I go to the charity and ask them. I go to other specialists if the woman's got, I don't know, what can I think of, epilepsy, you know, share with me, is this still a safe and realistic option? And they're the two words that I always use when I'm talking to women. Is it safe and is it realistic? The VBACs were a great example of that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, and Claire then goes on to say, I agree with barriers being raised when a high-risk woman would like a water birth. It's often dismissed as an option. Okay. And then we have a comment from Joyce Camargo, who says, hi Joyce, who says, I was very happy to bring our study about the experience of Portuguese women to experience spirituality in water birth. Gratitude, I really hope this opens up new study experiences. Thank you. I'm thinking, Joyce, you were happy to hear that Dianne talking about it. And of course, Diane's got all these questions that she wants answered. So if you know any of the answers, perhaps you need to get in touch with Dianne about it, because that would be really useful. Fantastic. I mean, now I just wanted to check, you were talking about Florence the obstetrician. Was that the TED talk?
No, it's a pod, and it's called the OBS pod.
Right, we need to put that on next week's resource list, I think.
Yeah, it came up on Facebook and I thought, oh, that looks good. So I sent it to myself when I was on holiday. I was sitting on the beach playing with the phone. And of course, last night when I had some time, I actually looked at it, or listened to it actually, in fairness. And she's really, really interesting. And certainly coming from an obstetric background. And she says at the beginning, you might wonder why an obstetrician is talking about this. And then she tells a whole birth story. So yeah, it's really good. And I'm waiting to listen to some of the others. There's quite a list of them. I think that was number 24. So I've got to go back find the other 23 now.
You've got some catching up to do, Dianne. No, I mean, that's fantastic, because I know I think we had that on one of our previous resource lists. She did a TED talk starting off with her legs in stirrup position. That was the start. It was very stunning, actually, very stunning. And again, it's really lovely to hear an obstetrician, a female obstetrician, just sharing and kind of giving it that perspective, which is very refreshing and helpful, I think. No, that's really fantastic. And the other thing I need to say, that to everyone watching, that Dianne, because Dianne's going off to Bali, and we're going to ask her to be our own correspondent, the Radio 4 thing, our special correspondent. So if you're going to Bali, you need to make yourself known to Dianne and say hello, and she might have some form of recording item so that she's recording all the hellos, so that we can have some sort of feedback from Bali at that point, because she can't just be rattling about listening to all these presentations.
My plea with Bali, and it's something I learned very early on, don't just go to the sessions of, if you know the person you're supporting them, fab, because it is very daunting, I think, if you've not presented before at that sort of level. But go to sessions of places or people you've never seen or heard of, or sessions that you think, what does that mean? Because that's where you learn. That's where you network. So yeah, you'll often see me hanging around, like coffee corners and thinking, now where am I going to go? Where's everybody going? We're all going that way. I'm going to go that way. Because you just learn so much, and some of the environments that our colleagues working is just amazing. It really is amazing.
It's I'd absolutely agree, Dan, because it's very humbling, because we are very lucky in the resources we have. And I would agree with you about the kind of the idea of not choosing to go to your country's presentations always. Go to different ones if you're going. And we've talking about this before we came on air, is sometimes I've previously, having been to a few ICMs, I'm not going this time, sadly, but never mind. I found myself in the wrong room and thought, oh my goodness, I've come to the wrong thing. But actually, those are the sessions that have been so much better, because we do tend to go to the things we like, and we know. And then you sit down and you're listening to the speaker, who can be fantastic, and you think, well, I know this. And then you go to something else where there's a midwife who's working in a special care unit where they don't have clean running water, and discusses what they have to do to keep things safe for mothers and babies. And you kind of think, wow, this is midwives. It's still midwives, but this is, we do different, we have different strengths, we have different things that we have to achieve. But these midwives, and they're fantastic. It's such, I'm so jealous that Dianne's there in the next couple of weeks, but it'd be really fantastic, I know. Now we have another question, and this is Lola Ornato. Hi, Lola. Haven't heard from you for a little while. And she says, can you train the doctors in WaterBirth, please? Then they might be more supportive of it. And do you find doctors are willing to learn about it? I think Lola may have had, that may be a bit of an example.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, as I said, it's usually the midwives in this country who invite me, but I always say it is open to anyone. And I always say, have you invited the obstetricians? And sometimes there's like, they come very often in the UK. No, very. Abroad, it's different. I said, I've just come back from Spain, and I thought my host, Alicia, was the lead midwife until I got there, and she's actually the lead obstetrician.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So she'd facilitated it for her staff, including her doctors who did come, and her midwives. So that was quite, and I hadn't twigged it. The emails were going backwards and forwards, and I hadn't twigged it. and I hope to go back there. So yeah, I'll speak to anyone. If somebody phases me with a question, my standby is, should we have another cup of coffee while I think that through? Which always goes down fine. But yeah, we've had doctors in Italy come, we've had them in China, we've had them in India. So yeah, it's I think because the division between midwifery and obstetrics in some ways is stronger here than it is in other countries. So that's that's that team that we've got to build. And there are, as we just heard from the OBS pod, some brilliant obstetricians. Maybe we should ask her on and ask her that question.
Yes. Well, she'd probably be very happy, I think, for that anyway.
Yeah, I think she would.
Now, I always say this hour goes by so quickly, and it's gone. We've come to the end. I want to say a huge thank you to Dianne for sharing her expertise at huge short notice, off the plane, in she came. Fantastic as ever. My brain is full of all this research, which is lovely and really useful, because those are the tools we need in all the things we do. Those are the things that give us confidence in being able to debate with our colleagues and be able to help women make the choices they need to make and they want to make. So thank you so much, Dianne. I'm going to now say, okay, I want to say also thank you to Amy, who's behind the scenes, making sure everything's going to end up nicely in the podcast. Now, 6 o'clock in the morning for those of you who are into the podcast, and it all comes, that's all the work behind the scenes. And thank you also to Paul for putting through the questions to me, which is why I forgot to say that's why I'm heading away at my other screen to get the questions. Okay, and I've been asked to make sure that you know about the Welcoming International Nurses and Midwives Conference, which is the 20th of June. That's kind of the background of that is I heard today there's about half of the new entrants into the UK register are from overseas, and so we need to make sure that all of our colleagues feel as welcome as we did when we came, actually more welcome than some of us might felt when we came into the profession. Really important. Also, don't forget to book for the North Festival 4th of July, and Cardiff 12th of September. Still places available, and remember we're hybrid, so come and meet us face to face, but also you can get the recording as well. I also need to remind you, if possible, have a look at the information on the Facebook page about the crowdfunding, and if you've got some spare money and you want to support the project, because we want to expand, we want to be able to use the digital stuff even more than we do, and unfortunately things do cost money, as you all know. But in the meantime, you need to look after yourselves. We'll see you this time next week, same place, same time. And in the meantime, have a good week and take care. And thank you again to Dianne. See you next week.